guys, welcome back to another episode of Jesse's Card Empire here in my absolutely messy room. So today is finally the day. I've been talking it up for a while. I said they were coming back. We're back with EDH deck techs. Now, something I've been working on for a while now, and I have a bunch of decks that we're going to be going over the next, couple of months. But Kaldheim is in spoiler season, and there was one god so far that we're in week 2 of spoiler season that really caught me and made me want to build around it. If you know me, you're probably going, oh, it must be Valky, God of Lies. And while I do love my boy Tybalt out there playing his Loki analog in the set, this deck originally started out being built around him. But then a new god came out. And we had to take that entire plan and throw it in the trash. Instead, we are built around Tergrid, God of Fright. This is not a... I proxied out a couple of the cards that aren't out yet, and some of the cards I don't have. So I could go test this deck. Yes, this deck has already been tested. Played some Commander with the homies the other day, and was able to jam games. Also let some of them pilot this deck as well, to just get feedback on it. And this is feeling pretty spicy. So, as usual, the full list will be in the description. I'm only going to go over some key elements here, and let you guys fill in the blanks as you wish. And give you ideas if you want to brew your own. But if you want to just see my full list, copy it verbatim, see the absolute spikiness of my playstyle, that list will be in the deck. That list will be in the description below. But Tergrid, God of Fright. Let's go over this commander. This commander that's terrifying a lot of people. There are people already saying that they want to rule 0 this commander right out the gate, and I think that's unwarranted. It is terrifying. It is the god of fear. But I don't think it's quite nearly as bad from testing in my group last night as people are thinking. So, Tergrid, God of Fright is 3 black for a 4/5 with Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So, you have all sorts of lovely interactions here. It's essentially, not quite, but essentially, an It That Betrays. But for way less mana and a much smaller body, no Annihilator. And so rightfully, a lot of people were freaked out. It That Betrays is a very powerful commander staple. Especially in the Steal Your Stuff or Reanimator decks that just want to take over your opponent's stuff. There are some caveats with this deck, though. The pods that I played in, some people busted out some commanders that immediately do cause a bigger problem for this deck than a lot of people are realizing. Zedru, Blim. These are commanders that can keep me in check very easily. If I'm making, everyone give me their stuff, then there are a lot of things that I don't want. Now, it is a May. I don't have to take it. But that just means I'm losing a lot of value against things like Zedru players. However, me taking everyone else's stuff, Zedru's gaining a bunch of value. Blim's getting to do hilarious things that he thinks is funny. So, I don't think this is quite the shock and awe deck that everybody thinks it is. And keep in mind, I am an extremely competitive player. I play in an extremely competitive group. We are not CEDH. We love our jank. But we are trying to take our jank to the largest, fastest, best possible conclusion. We also heavily proxy in our group, so even players who, unlike me, are not fortunate enough to have access to these high-powered cards, still get to play with them. So... And there's my dog being cute in the background with her little Halloween sweater, even though it's January. So, first things first. Tutors. You're in black. You're gonna want tutors. They help you with your consistency, and they help you get the silver bullets that I've put in this deck to handle certain situations. So, I ran probably the three that you're going to think of. I ran a vampiric, I ran a demonic, and I ran an opposition agent. This deck is entirely built around stealing your opponent's stuff, and using it to improve you. So I figured opposition agent would be a great inclusion here because it gives me even more tutors. I just don't tutor from my deck, and I like that. I like that a lot, especially with thematically how the deck is just trying to take over all of my opponent's stuff. In my testing last night, one of the biggest things I realized is a lot of the discard effects are very symmetrical, so you want to have a ton of draw power. I think out of all the draw power I'm running, probably the most important one is Necropotence, and that was not in during the testing last night. That was something I was definitely like, okay, this deck needs Necropotence. After doing my test last night, and very, very quickly putting everyone into a point where everyone's top decking. And if you want to successfully close out the game, I think that's definitely something you want to do. Another very important draw spell, in my opinion, is actually a creature. That's Harvester of Souls. There's a lot of making your opponent sacrifice their creatures, so of course, not only are you going to get that creature, but if you have Tergrid out, but also getting to draw a card with Harvester of Souls is very nice. In the discard central theme of the deck as well, having an Urgoros, the empty one, is actually really nice. He's from Dominaria. He's 6 mana for a 4/3 with flying, and whenever he deals combat to a player, that player discards a card at random. If they can't, you get to draw a card. So one of the other things I noticed, some cards that were in the deck last night, and I've actually cut, and some people will be like, wow, those cards are really good, why would you cut them? I cut out Necrogen Mists, and I cut out Oppression. Both of those cards were very, very good for a minute, but then once everyone was empty-handed, they didn't do anything except punish me, who was consistently trying to amass more card advantage. So you have to think about, okay, well, it's good for the first couple of turns, I get value out of it, but then if it's only hurting me, I don't really want this thing to stick around, and there's no good way to sacrifice enchantments in this deck. So instead of keeping them around, I decided to cut those cards, because we have plenty of discard spells. We're going to run our opponents out of their hand pretty quickly without the consistent discard. And also, to an extent, some people punish your cards like that, especially Oppression, where it's very much a you play the game and you get punished for it. I know is a little bit of a feels bad thing, so there's that in consideration. I mean, this entire deck is basically feels bad, so but there's that. Another important aspect is we're playing some cards with some very high CMC. So we need a lot of ramp. Ramp was super important. The other thing is when I lent the deck to one of my friends to pilot, and I piloted something different, he had a super explosive turn one. He went swamp into Dark Ritual, used one of the manas from Dark Ritual to cast Soul Ring, used the Soul Ring and the 2 other black mana to cast Liliana of the Dark Realms, which he then immediately upticked and went and got a swamp. Pretty explosive turn 1. So, and then on second turn, on his turn 2, he played Tergrid, the commander. Like, that's really good. And basically, once you get to a point where you turn to Tergrid, and then you start making your opponents like discard, or they just have a slow start, you run away with the game. So, that being said, fast mana and mana doubling is a major thing in the deck. You can take that in whatever direction you want. For me personally, that obviously you heard the aforementioned Dark Ritual and Soul Ring. But for me personally, I also include cards like Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus since I have them. Or if your playgroup's cool with proxies, please proxy these cards. They're stupid expensive. Outside of that, some traditional mana doubling in black is also really, really good. Things like Nirkana Revenant, Cage Sun, and Cryptghast will help you get to your bigger spells faster. And that is very, very important for the deck. One of the cards in here that I'm super high up on. Also, you're in a mono killer deck. You should be playing Nyx Lotus. Nyx Lotus is really good. But one of the other 4-mana rocks that I'm really high up on that I think is super underrated in just about every deck is Empowered Auto Generator. This was a precon card, and I don't think it gets enough love. I understand that it's a 4-mana mana rock that comes into play tapped, and a lot of people are like, eh. But over the course of the game, it just gets absurd. Like I had it at a point last night where I was tapping it for like 6-7 mana. Like that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. And so I don't hate that. So there are other mana rocks. They will be in the description. Obviously, you're in mono black. You can actually. A lot of people think Arcane Signet is only like a fixing card, but actually it's a really good ramp spell in mono colored decks as well. Because it's just like turn 2, you don't have anything to do. Play an Arcane Signet. Next turn, you're at 4 mana. It's good. It's good. So one of the other things I always include in decks is things don't always go to plan. Things don't always work out. And sometimes you got to reset the board, so that's why we play Wraths. I personally play 3 in this deck. A Toxic Deluge, a Damnation, and a Mutilate. I mean, you're running pretty much all swamps. You also have Urborg in here, which is a card I would recommend. If you got the access to it. It's only like, I say only. It is an expensive card for a piece of cardboard, but they're like, you can get Urborgs for like $22 to $25. We were looking it up last night. So I run those 3 Wraths to help control the board. Now I have a bunch of sacrifice effects as well, so hopefully we never need those, and we just have control of the game. But in the case we don't, there's that. Here is the bulk of the deck. This is mostly what we're doing. This is sacrifice. This is discard. I'm not going to go over every card here because that would make for a very long video. And I'm trying to make these deck techs, the old ones I used to do were like an hour long. I'm trying to get them down to like 15, 20-minute videos where we just talk about the key cards. And then if you want to check out the list, it's in the description. But some of the highlights that I really like are Thieving Amalgam. This is from the old Sultai Morph Precon. Some of you, he's also got the creature type of Ape Snake, so some people refer to him as Snape. But he's a 7-mana, 6/7. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest the top card of that player's library, which also means if it's a creature card, you can pay its mana cost, turn it face up. Pretty dope. And then whenever a creature you control but don't own dies, its owner loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. And that static ability is the reason I'm playing him. Like, basically, you're going to be constantly gaining control of your opponent's creatures, and then you're going to end up sacking them to other effects. So, makes sense. Pox effects, like Fraying Omnipotence, Pox, and Smallpox are all really good in here. Especially if you've already hit your opponents with a couple of, discard or sacrifice effects that have given you things to cushion out how hard those hit you. And they're even better if you have like Dictate or Grave Pact, Dictate of Erebos or Grave Pact on the board, because then you get to take their the cards that they gave you earlier in the game through discard or sacrifice outlets, sacrifice them to the Pox effect, and then creatures you control died, so then your opponents have to sacrifice more, so you end up taking basically their whole board off of a Pox effect and then gaining control of it while giving up some of the cards that they already gave you, so you're not really losing any value. Obviously, discard effects like Siphon Mind, Unnerve are very powerful in this deck. The new Court of Ambition from Commander Legends fits in here very nicely. Brings Monarch into the game, and also when you are the Monarch, your opponent either has to discard 2 cards or lose 6 life. And trust me when I say this card came up several times, it actually wins games. If your opponent, if you've already taken a very oppressive state with Tergrid, and your opponents have a hard time getting through to attack you, this thing can just crush out their life total and win you the game. Now, direction you could take this deck, and I didn't, was to also include a bunch of rack pieces, whether it be the Rack, Shrieking Affliction, Davriel, Rogue Shadow Mage, and cards like that. You could include those so that way when you get your opponents empty-handed, you just start burning them and closing out the game that way. I didn't go that way. I just want to beat my opponents down with their own creatures, with their own abilities, and basically play their decks against them and punish them for playing broken things. Shieldred, the Whispering one, is really good. A bulk rare that I think is absolutely beautiful in here is Awaken the Erstwhile. Everyone discards their hand, and then for each card they discard this way, they make a 2/2 black zombie, but then you get all the things that were permanents that they discarded, so spicy. Liliana Vess, Delirium Skeins, obvious inclusion here. Everyone discards 3, but again, one of the reasons you're running a ton of draw power and cards like Necropotence is so that you can recover from these symmetrical mass discard effects and not really care. Waste Not is a very important card in the deck, especially if you can turn to a Waste Not, or if you're really savage like turn 1 it. Every single discard effect you play for the rest of the game has resonating impact, and also making your opponents discard a bunch of their creatures and netting zombies give you things you can sack into a pox, even if you don't have Tergrid out to recur their creatures as you make them discard them. Obviously, It Betrays. Another Eldrazi that I think fits in here really well is Ulamog of the Infinite Gyre. He has Annihilator 4, which is going to be really good for if you have out Tergrid or anything. He gets to pop something when he comes out. But most importantly, what I used him for several times last night was to recur my graveyard back into my deck. I would discard him to one of the symmetrical discard effects, shuffle everything back in, and be regassed and refueled and have a deck full of action, whereas my opponents were struggling to find more cards. Necrotic Hex from Commander Legends, really good. Another one that's really good is Sat's Will from Commander Legends, where you get to do both modes if you control your commander, but either way, both of them are pretty powerful. A new card from Kaldheim, obviously very much designed to fit within this deck, is Eradicator Valkyrie. It's a 4-mana 4/3 with flying, lifelink, hexproof from Planeswalkers, and it has the new boast mechanic, where it says you can pay 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or Planeswalker, but you can only boast if that card attacked. So if you have an opponent you can get in on with Valkyrie, and then you can boast it. You sack one of your creatures. Each of your opponent gets hit with an edict effect, and then you gain 3 creatures. It's mathematically really nice. A Zendikar Rising card that I really like in here, Soul Shatter. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or Planeswalker with the highest CMC among creatures and Planeswalkers that they control. Very helpful last night. Definitely loved it. We mentioned the Poxes. Death Cloud is a pretty obvious fit in here. You also get to play the full Monty of Plaguecrafter, Fleshbag Marauder, and Demon's Disciple. They all fit in here really nicely. Torment of Hailfire. This card is already a win con in most decks, and it wins so much harder in here. Because even if your opponents somehow do have the resources to discard and sacrifice, you just take them all. And then they, like, it's before it could potentially go either way, where it could win you the game or it could cripple your opponent enough that you could win the game. Now it's 100%. You cast this for like X equals 8 or more, you'll win the game. It's amazing. And then finally, one last one I want to cap off on is Meyer in Misery. Again, it was a commander precon guard, but it's one of the few ways you can you have that can make your opponent sack an enchantment. And that can actually be super relevant for the deck as a way to get very powerful enchantments. Like, say they don't have out any... you've gotten rid of all their creatures, but they still have, like, a Mirari's Wake. Boom! That's my Mirari's Wake. What do you mean, your Mirari's Wake? Finally, in the event that, let's say, your opponents are able to get in a Wrath, clear the board, reset everything, everyone's back to square zero, a bunch of creature cards in graveyard, a little bit of reanimation goes a long way. Animate Dead for the early game if something like that happens, and most importantly, Rise of the Dark Realms for the late game. Just take all of your opponent's creatures and put them into play. Really, really good. Finally, land-wise, a bunch of basic swamps. There are some utility lands that I think you should be running. Mine will be in the description, but the big one, obviously, if you can afford it, or proxy it, Cabal Coffers is really good. Urborg is really good. Urborg, especially in this deck, because you're going to end up with, you have land sacrifice effects, or if your opponents are discarding lands, you're getting those lands, so you're ramping even faster. But it's a mana color you don't really have access to, or they're mana colors you don't really have access to, so they're not going to do a ton for you, unless you have Urborg out. Then they all turn into swamps, and then they do bonkers things with Cabal Coffers, with other things like that. War Room from Commander Legends is really nice in here. Nice little way to draw in the land slot. Ancient Tomb is another one, and obviously it's a monocolored deck, so Nykthos Shrine to Nyx is very, very nice. That's the deck. Final thoughts on the deck. The deck is very strong. I do think it's up there. But I would say build your version of it. Figure out what your playgroup likes before you simply just rule zero this commander. There are decks that it polices, and there are other decks that police it. If your pod already has Zedru or Blim, then I actually think the power level of this deck is not going to be nearly as bad. Also, this is very all in on Tergrid. If you don't have Tergrid, then the deck doesn't do as much. So if your opponents just play the removal game and keep your Tergrid dead or off the battlefield one way or another, you making them sacrifice and discard everything really just slows down the game. It doesn't do a ton. So that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your command group. Some people like slow grindy Magic. Some people want to get games in, win, and be done. Whatever your play style is, keep that in consideration. Think about your play group. I'm fortunate enough to have a play group that's just like, yeah, let's all do nasty things to each other, and we'll all be friends at the end of it, and it'll be okay. We have like one guy who gets salty, and we finally broke him, and now he's just like, yeah, let's just do cool stuff, and if we win, we win. It's just a game. So that is very fortunate. That being said, again, if you're worried your playgroups are going to hate you or plan or be like, you can't play that deck, blah, 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 proxy it out. Don't buy the cards. And I'm somebody who sells cards. So, please try before you buy. Because there is a good chance that this deck will just produce salt like it's a Himalayan salt mine. But I think it's very relevant because it also polices other things like Korvald and the aristocrat style decks and can keep them in check, as well as it gets policed itself by like Zedru and Blim donation decks, because suddenly you're controlling a bunch of everyone's stuff. So Blim is going to be dealing a bunch of damage, and Zedru is going to be just helping them amass the card advantage to just crush the table. So again, worthwhile discussion here. Thank you guys for watching. Those of you who don't know, I also stream 3 days a week over on Twitch. We play Arena right now. I'm looking to start expanding out, playing some things outside of Arena, including a first-time playthrough of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild as soon as I can figure out how to hook up my Switch to the streaming platform, but I'm kind of a fucking boomer when it comes to that, so there's that. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. for those of you who want to support me. The card shop is the best way to do that right now. Link to the TCG Player store is in the description. Looking at doing Patreon stuff here soon. I'm just going to figure out what I'm going to offer, as well as I know Tier 1 will obviously be the Discord, but outside of that, we'll figure it out. That being said, thank you guys for watching. Please like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next time. Peace.